Narayana Samarambam Vyasa Shankara Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om Vasudevendra Yogindram Natva Jnana Pradam Gurum mumukshunam hitartaya Tattva Bodha vidiyate. Okay, so we've been studying this section in Tattva Bodha about qualifications. Qualifications are mental qualities. Qualifications are mental preparedness that is required to successfully hear the teachings of Vedanta and to assimilate its meaning. And thus far, we've covered discrimination, or viveka, dispassion, or vairagya, and in the last video, we took up the sixfold discipline, Samadhi, Shatka, Sampatihi. So we've covered 3 of the Ds. We've got dispassion, we've got discrimination, and we've got discipline. Okay? If you don't remember what those are, then by all means, go back to the previous videos and watch them. I'll make that note. I don't know if you're watching this video on my website or if you're coming across it randomly on YouTube, but if you haven't seen the videos that have already happened previously, then definitely go back and watch them, because this teaching goes step by step and each lesson builds on the previous lesson. So just a recommendation that if you haven't watched all the other videos that come before this, go back and take a look at them. Or if you've forgotten what has been said, then also, by all means, go back and take a look at those videos. So we said that there was a 4-fold qualification, sadhana chatushtaya, the 4-fold qualifications. We did the first 3. The third one was a 6-parter. Right? The 6-fold discipline was control of the mind, control of the senses, observing your own duty, taking care of your own responsibility in accordance with your own personality, with your own personal nature. And by personal nature, I don't mean your nature as the self. I mean the nature of this body and mind, the apparent body and mind. Okay, so observing your own duty, taking care of your own responsibilities in accordance with your own relative or apparent nature as a person. There is also forbearance. Okay, there is the ability to endure uncomfortable situations and stick with your continued inquiry. There is the ability to focus on a given topic for extended lengths of time. That was the samadhana. And then there's also the open-minded trust in the teacher and the teaching. Okay, you kind of take on board what you hear conditionally and then investigate it. But you got to do that with an open mind, because if your mind is closed from the beginning, if you're constantly trying to second guess or question everything right at the beginning, then you're not even going to be able to hear the information. You're not going to be able to hear the teaching at all, and that's not going to be helpful. Like someone who's very cynical or skeptical. You can be a skeptic with the idea that you want to investigate certain things, but some people are so in love with their doubts. They're so in love with what they think they know that they won't even open themselves to consider an outside possibility. And that's really not going to work here. As I've said before many times, if what you know now is completely true, then you wouldn't be here listening to this teaching. You wouldn't need to know who you are if you already knew who you were. That's just a fact. It's not anything negative. It's not meant to be a negative statement. It's not meant to be a judgmental or confrontational statement. It's just a statement of fact. Knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know is very important. So if you're here at this teaching, then there's probably something about yourself that you don't know. So it's a good idea to just be open to what the teacher and the teaching are saying. And really, there's not a difference between those two, because the teacher is just saying what the teaching says. That's all. The teacher's just a mouthpiece for the logic of the scripture. So that's the sixfold discipline. We've covered all those. Now we've come to the fourth qualification, and that is the all-consuming desire for freedom. Let's see. Reading from the text here. What is an all-consuming desire for freedom? It is when freedom is your primary desire and foremost priority. Why would freedom be your primary desire and foremost priority? Well, we've talked about desire, why we want things. We've talked about priorities, why we put a lot of emphasis on trying to accomplish certain things or gain certain things. We talked about that at great length, talking about what do you want from objects? Objects being anything that you can know, anything that you can experience. What do you want from money? What do you want from accomplishments? What do you want from a particular career? What exactly do you want from a successful relationship or a family or any of those kind of things? What is it that you want? Well, we've determined that what we want is freedom. Permanent freedom. Not temporary blips of happiness, experiential happiness. That's not exactly what we're looking for. We're looking for permanent freedom. So when we see clearly that that permanent freedom can't be achieved through getting objects, because of course objects are temporary and objects themselves don't contain the freedom, when we see that that's the case, then we don't have to make them the kind of priority that they were before. We see that we want freedom, so then what? We decide to go for the freedom directly, which means to understand what we really are, to understand what our true nature is. So the attraction of objects diminishes. I mean, they are what they are. Okay, you can get temporary enjoyment from objects. Objects have a transactional value. Okay, that means that in this appearance of a world, certain objects do perform certain functions. I mean, you use a knife to cut a vegetable, not a spoon. Okay, you eat cereal with a spoon, not a knife. Money, for instance, has a transactional value in this world, meaning that you can use money to buy certain things. You can use money to get shelter and food. Relationships with other people, friendships, marriages, relationships with your children, things like that, have a transactional value. Okay, they do provide a sense of community, a sense of family, a sense of security in those ways. They do. But what we're saying is that they just don't solve the problem of wanting permanent freedom. You can't get permanent freedom from those things. So the reason that we really put so much effort into getting those things, and not only getting them, but keeping them and maintaining them. It's not enough to get a relationship. You have to maintain that relationship or else it dissolves. It's not enough to get money. You have to maintain that money or else it goes away. If you don't manage it correctly, then you accidentally spend it all or blow it on something silly, and then that transactional security, the transactional value of money, is gone. And so we put so much emphasis on that side of it that it distracts us from really pursuing what we really want, which is freedom. And we put a lot of effort. If you look at your own life, at least in the past, or maybe not so much now, but even at least in the past, how much effort you put into accomplishing these certain things or getting these objects. You really think about that, because that's really the sum of your life. The sum of your life is the things you did to get what you wanted or to get rid of what you did not want. And you can take it very seriously, thinking that those things will genuinely give you the permanent freedom that you want. So what we're saying here is that when you see that that isn't possible, then you can take that intense desire that you directed towards those objects formerly and put that towards the pursuit of self-knowledge, because self-knowledge is the means to permanent freedom, because it's the understanding that you are permanently free. So that's what we're saying here. Freedom, what is an all-consuming desire for freedom? It's when freedom is your primary desire. It's not as if you don't want anything else at all. I mean, of course, you're going to want food. You're going to want to keep clothes on your back. You're going to want to keep some money in your bank account. You're going to want to maintain the relationship you have with your family, for instance. It's not as if you have zero desires at all. It's just that you clearly understand that the desires for those things, getting those things or keeping those things, is not going to give you freedom. So then you slowly start to withdraw some of that desire. You withdraw that and you focus it and pinpoint it towards freedom. It's like that thing when you take a little magnifying glass, okay, and you hold the magnifying glass up over the sun, and the sun's rays, which were deflected in many directions, goes down through that magnifying glass and is able to be concentrated enough to burn a hole in a piece of paper, for instance. So what we're saying is that we have this multitude of desires that is just constantly spreading our attention and our energy out towards all of these different things. So as we start to see that what we really want is freedom, we can bring that desire in. We can focus it and focus it and focus it. We can take this magnifying glass and we're going to take all of that desire and put it towards gaining self-knowledge. We're going to put it towards self-inquiry. We're going to put it towards our spiritual practice. That is when freedom becomes your foremost priority. It's what you want most, and you start to try to get your life in harmony with that. Okay? Because again, your life is really the sum of what you want in a lot of ways, because the job you have or the things that you do or whatever are all trying to get you towards what you want. So now what we're saying is what? We're going to get our lives in accordance with what we want, and that is freedom. So all-consuming desire for freedom is to make it your foremost priority. Getting particular objects or things like that isn't your foremost priority. Freedom is your foremost priority. Okay? Primary desire and foremost priority. Okay, so I got the desire and priority mixed up there. But again, we're saying, what is it that you want the most? I want freedom. What is my priority in life? Freedom. Okay, priorities determine what you do. Okay, so if your foremost priority is money, then all of your activities are going to be directed towards getting, keeping, making more money. But if your priority is freedom, then your activities are slowly going to become all directed towards freedom. It's going to be listening to the teaching. It's going to be contemplating its meaning. It's going to be looking at your life and making sure that the way that you're living is in harmony with truth and is conducive to continued listening to the teaching, Shravana, and contemplation of the teaching, Manana. Okay? That's what's going to happen. There's a traditional story about a student and a teacher, and the teacher one day just mentions this all-consuming desire for freedom to him in passing, just kind of, there's this all-consuming desire for freedom. The Sanskrit word is mumukshutva. Okay, so he mentions mumukshutva. And the student says, well, what is that? What is this mumukshutva? He says, it's a really important qualification, but just don't worry about it. Nah. And so he just let the student's curiosity grow. And every once in a while he kind of mentioned mumukshutva, and he'd ask him, what is it? What is it? He's like, oh, don't worry, in time I'll tell you. So one day they're just going down to have a swim in the river. They go down to the river and they both get in. And the student goes ahead of the teacher, and he doesn't realize that the teacher's kind of sneaking up behind him. And all of a sudden, the teacher jumps on the student's back and pushes his head down underwater, almost to the bottom of the river. And the student starts thrashing and trying to get loose and struggling and struggling and struggling. And just when he thinks he's about to pass out, the teacher pulls his head up and lets him out of the water. And he just takes a huge breath, gasping for air, and he's just furious. And he can't understand why the teacher did that to him. And he's like, what were you thinking? I almost drowned. What was going through your mind there that you thought that you should do that to me? That was really irresponsible. It's dangerous. And the teacher says, okay. I understand. I get what you're saying. That's completely valid. But let me ask you something. When your head was down under the water, what did you want? So I don't know. So he'll think about it. What is it that you wanted? He goes, well, I wanted air. The student says, I wanted air. And the teacher said, okay, well, were you wanting more money? Were you wanting power? Were you wanting fame or sex? Did you want food? Did you want pleasure? Did you want any of those things? He says, no. When I was under the water, all I wanted to do was breathe. That was the only desire in my mind. That was my only priority. And he said, okay, well, now you know what mumukshutva is. Now you know what the all-consuming desire for liberation is to want that one thing more than anything else, to the exclusion of all that other stuff. All right? Now, let me make a note here. We say, what? Does that mean that if freedom is your only desire, that you give up everything that you do? You get rid of your family, you get rid of your job, you put on a loincloth and you go sit in a cave somewhere or sit in an ashram or something like that. Is that what we're talking about here? And the answer is no, not at all. Because why? Well, think back to some of our previous qualifications. What about the sixfold discipline? What about uparama, the observance of one's own duty? This is something that people overlook. They think, well, if I want freedom more than anything, if I want to get enlightened, then I have to just run away from all this stuff and get rid of these obstacles to my enlightenment. These things aren't necessarily obstacles to your enlightenment, they're aids. Because we're talking about getting qualified, we're talking about getting your mind prepared in a certain way. And part of the way that you get your mind prepared is to live your life in the best way possible, to meet the situations that come to you in the most responsible and appropriate way. Whatever duties that are assigned to you in life, whatever situations you find yourself in, you're supposed to meet those things. And by doing those things without attachment and aversion, just doing them for the sake of doing them, that actually does help to prepare your mind. Most people want to get away from their responsibilities because they just want to get away from their responsibilities. And spirituality seems like a good excuse. I don't like my life, I don't like the situations, so I'll be spiritual, and then that means that I can kind of just get away from the things that the world is asking me for. And that isn't true. It's not true at all. There are some things probably in your life that are maybe unhealthy or unconducive to proper self-inquiry. There are probably unnecessary things in your life, frivolous things in your life that you could probably get rid of. Certain activities, certain possessions, etc. That's something you have to determine for yourself. That is true. There are some things that can probably go because they might be taking up time that you can be using for self-inquiry and all of those sort of things. For listening to the teachings of Vedanta, for contemplating their meaning. Some of those things may get in the way and may need to go. But that doesn't mean that everything has to go. Because sitting in a cave is actually an action. Living in an ashram is an action. Backpacking around India doing yogic practices is also an action. Those are just other things you do. Okay? It's not exactly what you do. It's the attitude with which you approach these actions. And that's really the most important thing. That is what helps you get qualified. It doesn't say get qualified by running away from your responsibilities, by shirking your duty. It doesn't say that at all. It says you need to meet these things and take care of them to the best of your ability, in an appropriate way and in a timely fashion. So we're not talking about having the desire for freedom be foremost, mean that you just abandon everything else. Right? There's certain things that you're going to continue to do. There's certain responsibilities that you need to continue to undertake. And having freedom be your foremost priority doesn't exempt you from that. You need to work these things out for preparation of your own mind. Sometimes maybe in the spiritual literature, I understand this, reading about particular saints or swamis or different teachers or things like that, it made it seem like, worldly life was some kind of block or barricade, or it was some kind of impediment to freedom, to enlightenment. But it isn't. We think about maybe certain spiritual figures, leaving house and home to go on a great spiritual quest, and that's what we want to do. Maybe it seems too boring for us to just do our spiritual practice right in the middle of our regular lives, but that's how it is for most people. You have certain things that you do, you have certain ties, and it's not that, you give those things up. You just understand them for what they are. You say, okay, these things are what they are. Okay, my family is what it is. My relationships are what they are. My money is what it is. They have certain value, and I value them myself, but I just understand that they are not going to give me freedom. So if I want to get freedom, I have to direct my attention and my desires into the pursuit of freedom. And you can do that amidst your daily life. Okay? Spiritual practice, self-inquiry, is not like separate from your life. It's not your life is over here and the inquiry is over here. It isn't like that at all. They are one and the same. Your life is your spiritual practice. Inquiry is applied to your life on a moment-to-moment basis. So it's not as much as what you do as how you do it. And we'll actually talk about that when we discuss how to get qualified, how to prepare your mind. Because we're telling you what a prepared mind is, but we haven't really discussed how to get the mind prepared. And we'll take that up in a talk later about karma yoga. Okay, and karma yoga is how to live your life. It's the attitude with which to do your actions that helps you to get qualified. And that's what we're talking about here. So I just want to make that clear. It is a question that I had at one time. It's a question that other people have asked me in recent years. And it's just that, do I need to give up my life, or they just have this desire that they want to run away. Like they have this notion that they should just burn all of their possessions and throw their money away and run off to India or something like that, And that really just isn't the case for most people. Most of the time, I think it either stems from a misunderstanding of the scripture or stories about teachers or saints, or it stems from the desire to just abandon your responsibilities and run away. That's usually what it is. So, that isn't the case. You can and you must continue with your duties and just do them in a particular way. So one of the qualifications is observing your own duty, whatever that happens to be. It's not most people's duties to just run off and go meditate in a cave. It's most people's duties that you have to work a job. Okay, it's most people's duties that you take care of your family, etc. That is your duty. Not everybody is suited to become a monk. A lot of people want to do that just to escape responsibility. So I know I've harped on this a little bit, but I just want to make it clear. I want this to be encouraging to people to say, hey, whatever your situation is in life, then spiritual practice is possible and self-inquiry is also possible. So we're about out of time here. So let's just recap this qualifications. All right, so we have the fourfold qualifications, sadhana chatushtaya, and we can categorize these as the 4 Ds. All right. D, number 1, discrimination or viveka. Discrimination, if you don't like that word, can be substituted for differentiation. It can be distinction. Okay, it can be distinguish. All right, so when discrimination means the ability to distinguish between what you are, the self, and what you are not, objects, between what you are, satya, and what you are not, mithya. Okay, so you can distinguish between those two. You can differentiate between those two. You can make a distinction between those two. So if for some reason discrimination doesn't resonate with you, that word, because it does have some negative connotations, you can use any of those other words. So the first D, discrimination, distinction, distinguish, etc. D number 1. D number 2 is dispassion. We see that objects do not give us the things that we want ultimately, because what we want is freedom. So we don't have to compulsively chase them. We don't have to expect something out of them that they can't give us and then be disappointed when we don't get it. Okay? We don't have to do that. And also knowing that ultimately, even though our own choices, we have a degree of ability to influence our own choices, we have a degree of ability to control our own actions, the results that come from them are not totally under our control. So understanding that, we can give up excessive attachment to the results of our actions. We can give up the anxiety. We don't have to worry about the results. We can just do our very best, do the actions to our very best ability, and then whatever results come, fine. Because worrying about it doesn't influence the result. It only makes you feel bad. Okay? If it makes you feel bad, it disturbs your mind, and your mind, if it's anxious and disturbed, is not suited for inquiry. So we've got discrimination, we've got dispassion, we've got discipline, and I already talked about those earlier in this video, so I won't go over them specifically, but we've got control of the mind, shama, control of the senses, dhamma, observance of your own duty, uparama, open-minded trust in the teacher and the teaching, shraddha, forbearance, the ability to endure difficult situations, titiksha, and the ability to focus on a given topic, samadhana, and finally, what we talked about today, desire, all-consuming desire for freedom, mumukshutva. So we have discipline, discrimination, dispassion, and desire, the 4 Ds. And you can remember that when you're trying to keep in mind what these qualifications are. And since the last one is desire, I'll close by saying this. We can see that if desire is listed here in the qualifications, the desire in and of itself is not bad. We're not exactly trying to get rid of all desire, because how can you get freedom? How can you get enlightenment if you don't desire it? And so we can see that desire here is an important component. It's not a purely negative thing. Right? Desire based completely on the idea that we can get fulfillment, satisfaction, permanent happiness, or permanent freedom from objects. Well, that desire needs to be investigated, okay? And that desire needs to be understood to be incorrect. Right? But we do have to have desire. We have to have a burning, all-consuming desire for freedom, for self-knowledge. And that, in that way, you could almost argue that desire is the most important qualification. Each one of them could be considered in its own right being the most important. But if we're talking about getting your mind qualified or prepared, one of the very best ways to do it is to clearly see that what you want is freedom, okay? Meaning self-knowledge. And when that is totally clear, then you naturally get your life in harmony with that goal. So if you have a burning desire, an all-consuming desire for freedom, then it naturally helps you, motivates you to do the kind of actions that will get your mind prepared for that knowledge. So that covers the fourfold qualifications: discrimination, dispassion, discipline, and desire. We'll move a little bit further into the Tattva Bodha text in the next video. Purnamidaf, Purnamidam, Purnat, Purnamadachyate, Purnasya, Purnamadaya, Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam.